Thanks, Priyank. Thanks for the intro and welcome to everybody. Really hoping that we get to learn something in this webinar. And like Priyank said, this is we're just scratching the surface on the modern way of doing things, and especially on Kubernetes. Why would you need it, and what it is, right? If you're just starting your journey on the containerization, this can help you to get started, and you can start your journey from here. And we'll also try to understand. I'll also give a small demo in the end, just to get a feel of how to get it started locally. And I'll just give. I think, yeah, Priyank has given a good summary of my experience. I'll just touch upon it. So I come with 15 to 16 years of experience in software engineering. Started my journey on the mobile side, developing application, middleware, and low-level graphics. Then moved on to backend, and then last couple of years I've been putting a lot of effort on the DevOps side. Why I spend most of the time is the containerization has been the whole journey of containerization is not easy, right? Especially when you have setup which is already working. Moving to a new way of doing things takes a lot of understanding and hands-on experience, right? So that's where most of my time has been going, and I thought this will be really helpful to people who are doing that. And I've been using a lot of cloud native technologies, moving to the cloud, using software specifically designed for the cloud. So most of my experience comes from using that and getting production workloads from it. That's a bit about me. Purely passionate about technology and always exploring new ways of doing old things. Right. With that, I think I'll. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'll share it in the end. With that, let's get started. So before we get on to anything, I think it's very important that we get an idea of how servers and server deployments have evolved over time. This will give you an idea why would you need to change anything, and why do you even bother, right? So if we look at age-old way of doing things, largely servers and applications have been, in the traditional sense, they are primitive in a way, right? They are mostly physical servers that you procure. These are huge servers, couple of gigs of RAM and a lot of CPU power. And you provision it, take a lot of time, and typically you end up installing huge monolithic applications on this, which takes months and years of software development. You install it, and it's a huge activity. And these infrastructure, this kind of infrastructure requires a lot of work. Where you get into the server, you modify something, you run it, you restart it, and it starts working. Right? So largely, this what you call this is as mutable infrastructure. You change things. So the server is static. You keep changing things there. Right? So they're not very agile. The very nature of software development in the is centered around you do months of development. And then you have the deployment, you have the testing. Is the typical SDLC where everything is planned 1 year in advance or 6 months in advance, and you provide it. And the biggest problem with this is it's not highly available. If this particular server goes down, you need to plan disaster recovery. You need to have other physical servers already running. You kind of have 1 or 2, maybe 2. Spread across 2 physical servers, and you rely on these two working all the time. But then if both of them go down, then it's very difficult. It's complete downtime. And one other problem is you run applications and they are most of the time the resources, the CPU, memory, everything is underutilized. You don't know, depending on the traffic, some huge machines, small applications, or sometimes they're idle. So you don't really have control over this. Yeah. So, and most of the time the deployments are manual. You get into the system, you install, and sometimes you set up scripts to do that, but most of the time they're manual and very expensive. Procuring them, maintaining them, getting a new one, it's it's not easy for a small company to get started. It takes time and very difficult to scale. Adding a machine takes months of procurement. And like I said, you generally run one application, one web server on a physical machine. Is it better now? Okay. So now we'll look at the world moved on to something called virtualized. So in a virtualized world, we started getting smaller units of operating system and machines which are hosted on these physical servers. And why you see this image over here is we start treating the servers as pets. So you're not stuck with one anymore. You have a bunch of them, but you provision them. You still provision them and keep it around. So you treat them as pets. You name them with code words like server ABC, server XYZ. But now we started talking about virtual machines, and large monolithic applications started becoming smaller applications. You have 2 or 3 applications, one front end, one back end, and one database, and the world started moving to this direction. And the server is still mutable in a way because you still go to your VMs, you modify the code and bring back the application. And things started becoming agile. You can deploy once in a month, less than a month. So it's kind of agile, I would say. And systems started becoming highly available, but it's heavy on operations. You do need a team to make sure that the VMs are around. What happens if the VMs go down? You need to provision a new VM. It takes some time. It takes some effort to bring it back. Right? And you can control the utilization of these virtual machines, and still not fully utilized, I would say, but better than running a single application on physical servers. And gradually, automated deployments started coming into picture, where you say deploy an application into 2 virtual machines, and it does it one after the other by load balancing. Still mutable because there are flavors of immutable also, but mutable is faster and less prone to failures. So you pluck out a VM, you install, and you get code. And not very expensive now that you are sharing hardware with other services. And also you started moving to cloud, where VMs can be provisioned on single machine and handed out to different customers. And scaling became easier. It's easy to scale now because you can add more VMs, and mostly it's very easy to add VMs. And now we are talking about one application per virtual machine, and you can have multiple VMs per machine. So this has been the world. I think most of the people, most of the organizations are in this stage where you have things working on virtual machines. So my focus for today is to move to the next stage, which most of the organizations are moving to, which is the containerized. What I mean by containerized, we don't look at servers anymore as pets. You don't name them. You don't really care for them when applications go down. You don't really worry about getting into the machine. There's a new way of doing things, right? So now think of them as cattle. You have lots of them. You have lots of them. You don't really name them. You number them. You have like container 1, container 2, container 3, and you talk in terms of I have 10 containers, 20 containers. And you always talk in numbers. Okay, 10 containers went down, 10 comes up. You only worry about that, right? Now, smaller applications, so VMs are moved to containers now. You talk in terms of containers. Smaller applications are now replaced with microservices. When you talk about microservices, they are very, very tiny applications. You break your business logic into smaller applications which can be discarded, rewritten, but at the end, you have a lot of control over that particular business logic. And since the business logic might be spread across your entire life cycle of the application, you end up writing a lot of things. And mutable infrastructure, so VM is moving more towards immutable infrastructure. When you say immutable, what we really mean is you don't really install anything. You don't install anything. Everything is pre-packaged. If something goes wrong, or if you want to deploy a new application, you just delete the old one and a new one comes up. And with this, we're extremely agile now. You can do parallel development. You can deploy hundreds of times in hundreds of deployments in a day. There are companies who do deployments every few minutes, and it's extremely highly available now. Very low on ops, because that's where I think we'll be. That's where we will be, going on talking about tools like Kubernetes, which makes it very easy to reduce your operations. You can set up pipelines, you can set up a lot of things. And full utilization, you can have a lot of smaller units using your single virtual machine or a physical machine. Makes it much better consumption, right? And automated deployments, pipelines, which can destroy and bring back applications without disrupting the traffic to your application. It's inexpensive now. You have your virtual machines running. Your applications. You can scale your containers with much ease, and extremely easy to scale because of our autoscalers and everything which you can configure. We'll talk about that. And now we are talking about one application per container or a pod, and then multiple containers per virtual machine or a physical machine. With this, I think I hope all of you get a sense of what we'll be talking about. We'll be focusing on this. So now we'll get into the internals. We'll try to understand what's Kubernetes.
Yeah, just before we proceed, there are a couple of questions on this.
Sure,
one is, DevOps follow Kanban? Is a question from Yashwant Reddy. So maybe you can put a follow-up question, but what I'm thinking is, do the DevOps team, should they follow the Kanban way of creating infrastructure? So if that's a wrong interpretation, Yashwant, please feel free to put a follow-up question.
Sure, I think I can take that. Kanban, the traditional way of Kanban is you pick up a bunch of items that you're going to work on, and you make sure that your list is does not grow over time, right? So you have 3 things that you're going to work in a particular iteration or a sprint, and you make sure that you focus on those three things. If a new priority comes up, you have to drop one of them, right? I think it's very. This is something that can help you keep your focus on when you're working on your DevOps tasks. I think different ways of doing this. Kanban is one. or if the DevOps team works very closely with the development teams, most of the stories come from the activity, and that can be a regular sprint where priorities are discussed and priorities. I think this works, but I think I would need more context from where the question is coming from. But I think that's what I can think of at this point.
Okay, thanks, Rajat. And there's one more thing about. Can you explain again on the immutable infra would mean? I think that's a very interesting concept. Maybe a little bit background on that, Rajat, please.
Sure. When I talk about, so let's understand what's mutable. Mutable is something, say today you need to deploy an application. So you provision a virtual machine, and you get the IP address of the machine, you SSH into that virtual machine, and then either you do manual deployments, you copy the binaries, you bring up the process, and then your process is ready. Now you're able to route traffic to that virtual machine. Right? Now, say there's a new version of the software application that you want to deploy on this machine. Typically, in a mutable infrastructure, what you do is you know the address of this machine. You can either do a SSH, or you can use tools like Jenkins, which can deploy the software into those machines. But largely, once the virtual machine is around, or your server is up, you are your strategy is always to get into the machine and replace the software, make some changes. You want to do some configuration changes. You are basically modifying the state of the server. Now, this is error prone because you never know what can go wrong, and also, even if you automate it to a certain extent, there can always be faults in your script, which can end up bringing the entire server down, and it takes a lot of time for you to bring it back. Typically, you will restart it. You will work on the same instance. So this is mutable in the way you are continuously changing the server over time. So now, when it comes to immutable, think of once you bring up the server, you're never going to touch it. It's going to run your application. Everything is bootstrapped. It's automated. Now your software is running. Your application is serving the traffic. Now, if there's a new version of software you want to deploy on the server, or you want to change some configuration, you don't really get into this machine. You tell a tool which I'm going to come to say, here's a new software here's a new software available. You package it as a container image, and you say tool like Kubernetes is going to say, all right, deploy this. So what it's going to do is it's going to bring down that container or a pod, and then it's going to bring a completely new one with the new software, and that takes its place, and it has its own cool-off window. So that way you are not touching the existing container or the server, which makes it very less prone to failures. So I hope I answered the question there.
Rajat, if I may just interject, a small comparison there would be, say, with a programming language, right? When you say strings are immutable, and any operation you do to the string, the old string is gone, and then a new object of the string is given to you. So similarly here, Kubernetes, which makes an immutable environment, is whenever you need a change in the environment, and when you deploy it, it's going to remove the old environment and then bring in a new environment with the changes in it. So you really did not step into and change the previous environment, but you just removed it and brought in a new object of an environment there. So that's the comparison or a parallel that you can draw.
I think you're largely right. You don't worry about it. And also, Kubernetes has mechanisms. I think there was one more question on downtimes. It really takes care of that by having a rolling over, right? Rolling updates where it waits for the older container to shut down before the new one is routed traffic to. So pretty much I think that's the way it is. I think we should move on. I think there are more content to cover.
Yes, Rajat. Yeah. I think the questions are also answered.
I think we will take more questions in the end, depending on how much time we have. All right, so we'll talk a bit about what's Kubernetes. Kubernetes, by definition, it's an open source system for automating deployment, scaling, and management of containerized applications. Three things that catches your attention when you read something like this is open source. Right? What does this mean? Why open source makes sense? And automating deployment, scaling, and management, if you look at it as a single statement, gives you kind of an idea of, okay, there's something which takes care of all this, right? Where you can write scripts and automate it. And then everything is around containers, like I said. So everything works on containers. So we'll come to that. So we'll talk a bit about this. So what's open source? So in a nutshell, I think it's what you can take away. The takeaway from this is you can run anywhere. Either it's a public or private cloud, or on on-premise machines, or if you want to get started, just to understand, you can just run it on the laptop, get a feel of it. In fact, you can get your entire infrastructure in a minuscule way on your laptop, and you can replicate that on the cloud. So being open source, all these providers, they'll all have to support the basic mechanisms of Kubernetes, right? It makes it much easier for you to not change anything when you move from different clouds. It makes it extremely portable. Containers, like I said, it's very lightweight, standalone. They just don't. It's not just about your application anymore. It's about your application configurations, the binary, the libraries required to run your application. Everything is packaged, makes it much easier to take your entire setup from your development to production or staging. Okay, I think that's a question. What's a container? I think container. I think it's a completely different, big topic on its own. Think of containers as a way. Containers, when it runs on a machine, they share the same kernel, and it runs like in its own user space. So each container shares the underlying resources, but it's independent in a way. So typically, if you see a virtual machine, it's like a guest OS running on top of your host OS. It's very fat in a way. You can't. A typical machine can have maximum 2 or 3 virtual machines. It is taking away, every virtual machine is taking away part of your computer resources. While it comes to containers, it's a level up. It shares the same virtualization, but each container is a very small unit which is abstracted out and gets its own quota of CPU memory, which is shared with the underlying. So I think I don't want to get too much on the containers. This is more around understanding more on Kubernetes, but I'll be happy to give some resources on containers. But just to scratch the surface, I think of containers. You can run 10 to 20 containers on a single machine, while you can run 1 or 2 virtual machines on a machine. Automating, yeah. So automating, when you say automating, most of the time you do it once, and then you're done with it. Every time you have to deploy, no manual intervention required. So in Kubernetes, automation is not just about deploying your software. It's also about how your traffic can scale, how your pods can scale. And it's declarative. So I'll touch upon a bit on declarative. So when we say declarative, what you mean is you typically say, this is what I want, and you put it in a configuration file. Say, I want my service to be this way. I want this to be the container software it has to run, and this is the scale it has to run at, right? You tell that to Kubernetes, and it orchestrates and it tries to get to that state to satisfy what you have declared. So it's kind of makes it easy for you to give your requirement to Kubernetes and it takes care of it. So I hope that gives you some sense of what Kubernetes is, and we'll get into the basics of Kubernetes. So we'll start with Kubernetes components, just at the top level. Kubernetes, when you look at Kubernetes, there are two parts to Kubernetes. One is the control plane, and then there are the worker nodes. So we'll talk a bit about control plane. Control plane, think of the area where all your cluster related information exists. It is responsible for running all your pods. And so with that, I think I'll talk a bit about what's a pod. It's very important that we understand what's a pod in Kubernetes. Think of pod as the smallest unit in Kubernetes where you run your application, and everything is centered around the pod in Kubernetes. So you can have one or more containers in Kubernetes. Typically, you won't see container term coming in Kubernetes. Most of the time you'll be talking in terms of pods. Pods is encompasses, it can have in the simplest term, one pod contains one container, but you can have multiple containers. So pods, so the control plane is responsible for scheduling the pods. When you say I want these many pods, the control plane takes care of it, and also it responds to events. What's happening in the cluster? Control plane responds to that. The heart of Kubernetes is everything works on an API server. When you provision a Kubernetes cluster, you get the API server endpoint, and you all changes to everything to the changes you want to convey to Kubernetes all happens through an API server. There are REST APIs which you can use. One of the component in the control plane is the controller manager. This is responsible for managing the worker nodes, which I'll come to, and job controllers, endpoints controller. I'll talk about this in a bit in the next slide. Think of it that there is a component here which is responsible for managing the life cycle of nodes and jobs and endpoints. I'll talk about endpoints later on. Service account is something which is at a permission level as to who can use what, right? And this is where it's very helpful to understand there is something called a cloud controller manager, which is optional. This is responsible for connecting to the APIs of the cloud provider, whether it's Google Cloud, AWS, Azure. This is the part where Kubernetes then talks to the cloud provider APIs. There's something called the etcd. Etcd is a very popular configuration management plugin. It is also used for leader election, how to in a leader follower mode to elect the leader when the leader goes down, promoting a follower. So Kubernetes highly relies on this. It is also used as a key store. It stores all the cluster information, the state information at any point of time, how many number of pods, everything is, it persists here. And there's a scheduler. Scheduler is responsible for scheduling the pods on the nodes. It's constantly looking at what you have told, and is it really happening? Are the nodes having the pods? Then comes the worker nodes. So typically the control plane is set up once, and worker nodes is where you have to scale based on your workload. Every node, worker node has a kubelet. Kubelet is a component which is responsible for talking to the control plane. Also, it's responsible for sending heartbeats and also making sure that the node is active. Then you have a kube proxy. I'll not get into the details of this. Think of it this way, that all traffic coming to a node is proxied by the kube proxy, and it is responsible for forwarding your traffic to the pods. And to run any container, you need a container runtime. Without that, many of the container-specific networking or the lifecycle cannot be done. And here, Kubernetes has support for different runtime: Docker, CRI-O, and Containerd. I think that's the spelling mistake, is Containerd, and also supports any flavors of Kubernetes CRI. And then you will have your pods running on these nodes. That's what they are for. You run your workloads here. And these are the smallest deployable units of computing that you can manage. So we'll get into that in the coming slides. So you can have many of these, as much as you want, depending on how many applications you are running and at what scale you're running your application. Hope that gives you a summary of the components. We'll try to go into the Kubernetes objects. So we'll understand more on the concepts now. When you start with Kubernetes, or when you're using Kubernetes, you'll come across pods, which we talked about. And most of the time, you won't be using a single pod. You will be grouping more than many pods together. And also, pods can have multiple containers. One example I can think of is assume you have a backend application running on a pod. Now you also want to have a logging container which can scrape the logs. You typically can keep it together for that particular container, and you can package it as a pod. But most of the time you will see it's a single container in a pod. You don't have to worry about multiple containers for all practical purposes. One important thing in Kubernetes is you'll come across is namespace. Namespace, think of it as a logical grouping of in fact, think of it as like within your cluster, you have multiple virtual clusters. Very helpful, because if you have a single cluster and if you're using it for, say, development or UAT, you can use namespaces to divide this into two so that you can have a clone of your entire infrastructure in the same cluster. So namespaces can be very helpful there. Next is workloads. I think this is the most useful part when you are designing your application. So the workloads, think of a workload as an application running on Kubernetes. It can be multiple pods. And what are the different types of workloads? Deployments, right? Deployments are something that you're going to use where you can say, okay, I have an application. Say, let's talk about, say, Node.js application. I have a Node.js application. Here's my application. Here's my container image for the same. This is the version that I'm going to use. And you can say, I want three or four replication, 3 or 4 pods for this particular application, which can share the load. Right? So all the specifications can be specified in your deployment, and deployment will take care of managing your pods. So I think this is a huge topic in its own. If you want to get into deployments, and it's just scratching the surface. Replica sets are also similar. Maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions, Aditya.
All right, yeah. So one, I think maybe it says about how well is Kubernetes integrated on Azure and GCP as AKS and GKE services. Can we park it to the end, maybe?
Yes, I have a slide on that. I'll
okay,
talk
cool. Cool. And Service Fabric mostly used in ASP.NET framework as business application web services.
I didn't get the question.
Yeah, even I didn't get the context of it.
Okay.
Okay, and there is one more. Maybe Yashwant, can you please add some explanation of that question, please? Are you trying to draw parallels between a service there and a service in Kubernetes? You can tell me. But there is one more question. Typical use case of using Kubernetes versus other container services.
Okay. I think I'll talk about that in the end. I think when.
All right. Cool. Yeah. So I'll park these two questions and I will read up at the end. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. I think question around services, I'm going to cover it in a minute. So we'll talk about that. So think of workloads. There are daemon sets. Deployments are typical with your application. Daemon sets are workloads where you can say, okay, every time a new node, a new worker node or a machine is added to Kubernetes, I want this particular application to run. So daemon sets makes it very easy. Typical use case for daemon sets is say, for example, you want to run your monitoring agents, which are monitoring all your nodes for host metrics. So you typically want it to run on every machine you have. So daemon sets are heavily used in this kind of use cases. Stateful sets are used when you have you want to do 1, 2, 3, and one application runs on a particular container or a pod, and then the next one depends on the results of that. You can package this together in a stateful set, and it can execute that together. And you can have more define your own workloads by using the custom resource definition provided by Kubernetes. One thing to note here is the job and cron job. Jobs can be used if you have to run a particular application from start to finish. It could be, say, for example, every morning you want to update your database, or you want to send something, send emails. Read from the database, do something, and get done with it. It is not a typical server application. It just comes up and goes after its job is done. So the jobs make it easier. So jobs, like I told you in the first component, that the controller manager is responsible. There's a process running there which looks for jobs which need to be scheduled, and it runs it start to finish. And typically everything runs in a pod, but it's an abstracted, it is managed by a job. So services, this is very important to understand. While we talk about pods for running your compute loads, services makes it very, it abstracts this so that you can, as a network service, it makes it easy to route, identify your application and route traffic to your application. And in Kubernetes, every pod gets an IP address, but services groups these pods together and routes traffic to it. And typically you can have, you can connect it to a load balancer, or you can expose it as a node IP. It's a completely topic on its own. I don't think we'll do justice if we get too much into it, but think of it as service is definitely needed when you want to expose your application to the outside world or internet. There are other ways of doing this as well. There's something called ingress and ingress controllers. Ingress makes it easy to set up rules. So you typically want to set up this traffic, SSL, everything once in your cluster, and you would want to deploy many services. And then based on routes, say, for example, abc.com / XYZ should go to this application, DEF goes to something else. You can make use of ingress, which routes it based on the rules that you specify. You will see ingress being used a lot nowadays. And then there are smaller concepts, which I think I'm just touching some of the most common ones. Persistent volumes makes it easy for you to use network storage or any other storage which needs persistence across your pods. And Kubernetes makes it very easy that you don't really have to worry about the underlying implementation of your storage. It abstracts with something called persistent volumes, which can be configured, saying you are configuring, say, NFS on your cluster, and then you use something called persistent volume claim to claim a portion of that network storage. And many different types of persistent volumes can be configured using storage classes. To be clusterFS or EFS, or there are so many which can be added as you want. But underlying for your application, it does not really matter much. And then there are config maps and secrets. Basically, you can load all your configurations once and can be used by your pods. And secrets can use your passwords and everything, and you can load it directly on the pod. Makes it much easier to not, from a security point of view, you don't really have to have all this in your pods or your containers. The network administrators or DevOps folks can configure it once, and you can have a separate lifecycle to manage them. I think I'm going to go a little faster and then have some time for a demo later on. So typically, just to give a sense of how your traffic gets routed to your cluster, I have this slide here. Typically, when you expose an application as a pod, you are using your deployment to hold your pods together, how many pods you need. And then you typically have a service which is interfacing at a network layer as a network service, which can route traffic to your pods. And then there are two ways that you expose this to the outside world. You have an ingress, which I just spoke about. You can have rules, and the ingress has a load balancer attached to it, which takes all the traffic from the outside world. And you would have configured all your SSL, everything on the load balancer level. You can also do without an ingress. Ingress might be a little too much for you to do at when you're doing it in the beginning. Services can be exposed as load balancers, which can be configured. But the problem here is typically you'll be running a lot of services. Every time you have to set up a load balancer, and makes it a little difficult to manage. And these load balancers, most of the time, your services, when you create, they automatically create the load balancers, basically depending on what type of service you create or what type of ingress. So it almost happens whether you're on different cloud. The cloud provider would have abstracted this to you. The way you create service on, say, EKS, or if you do it on AKS, you will end up getting the load balancer automatically. All right. So how to get started? We'll talk a bit about that. So if you're starting now, where to start? So I think if you want to get started on the cloud, AWS provides EKS, which provisions the cluster for you. And I'll talk a bit about it, about the steps that you're going to do. The different providers out there is Google Cloud has GKE, and Azure has AKS. And these are the popular ones. There are other ones also I'm not touching about. These are the most popular ones. And what does it cost you? One thing that would have crossed your mind is, are you going to pay a lot to this, right? Just for the cluster, if you want these cloud providers to manage the clusters for you, we're not talking about the worker nodes. We're not talking about your application, just to manage Kubernetes. Typically, you'll be charged around 10 cents an hour. So it's going to cost you about $900 a year, which is not much, I would say, depending on why this number makes sense. Is if you're running a very small application, then this might be overkill for a small organization. But if your workload is too high, then this amount is completely justifiable for the time you're going to spend less in terms of operations or maintenance. If you don't want to use the cloud, there are tools like KubeADM, which makes it easy for you to install it on your own machines. And at a minimum, it needs three master nodes for keeping it highly available. All right, so if you want to get started, you can spin up a cluster in these in one among these cloud. Typically takes about 15 to 20 minutes to spin up a cluster. Then you add a few worker nodes. You can start with one. You can have 2 or 3 depending on your workload. And your application has to be Dockerized. Make sure that it can be packaged as a Docker image. Then you need to create YAML files for writing your deployments and services. They're just a few lines of code. And then you need to apply these YAML files on the cluster, and you will get your load balancers or your IPs sorted out. Then you point those to your DNS records for whatever domain, point this to your load balancer, and you're ready to go. Typically, I would say these things can be done in a day for smaller installations. Depends, but pretty simple, I say. I mean, once you get an idea about the basic things. With that, I'll talk about some additional tools which I have come across. This is not extensive, very basic, I would say. Helm is something that you can use if you're writing too many YAML files and you have many environments where you want to replace many of the terms in your configuration files. Helm makes it very easy to have templates which you can use. There's also Kustomize, which is also similar, but claims to be simpler to manage your configuration files. Think of Kubernetes as a simple configuration file. It doesn't support many of the replacement of terms or anything. You have to create the YAML files and apply it. You have to modify it. These tools makes it very helpful to manage in a repository and use it as an environment. You can use Argo. Argo makes it very easy to run jobs. It can like if you have jobs which depend on each other in a directed acyclic graph, you can make it here. Argo makes it very easy to run your jobs on a daily basis whenever you need. You can also run CI/CD pipelines through Argo. Minikube. Minikube is very helpful if you want to try on your laptop. If you want to just get started, install Minikube. You can just get started. I'll use Minikube for my demo. Kube State Metrics makes it very easy for you to get the metrics of your system about Kubernetes in itself. Helps it along with Prometheus. Prometheus is a tool which can monitor your cluster. Along with Kube State Metrics, it can give you a nice display of what's the resource usage, how many pods are running, and everything. And Kubernetes has an add-on called a dashboard, which gives you a graphical and a nice web console where you can see how many pods, what are the state of the pods. You don't have to rely on command line for that. Terraform makes it very easy for you to script your if you want to bootstrap, you want to bring up a new Kubernetes cluster, you want to do certain things, Terraform makes it very easy. Of course, Terraform does a lot of things, but it's very helpful for bringing up Kubernetes clusters and install stuff. That's about it. I'll go on to the demo and just give you a small idea of how to bring up an application, and then we'll get into the question and answers. I'll just share my desktop now. All right. All right. So what I have here is I have a Kubernetes cluster running on my laptop. So the command that you use is kubectl. You call it kubectl, kubectl. I prefer using kubectl. There's huge threads on Reddit or Twitter on what people call them. I think there's a huge fan following for that. So you can get how many nodes are running. So right now, I have, like I said, Minikube. It's running on a virtual machine. I'm using HyperKit here as a single worker node, single node running right now, which is good, which acting as a master. And this is good enough for me to play around. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up an backend application, and we'll just quickly see how we can deploy software to it. I think we can cover a bit on the mutable, immutable with that. So what I have here is I have a backend application. It's a simple Node.js application. Which just says, when you hit the root endpoint, it says this is backend version 1. So it is already Dockerized. If you see the Docker file, you'll see it's already has pulls from the node image and then copies my code and exposes it over port 88. Now what we're going to do is let's try to. So I've already pushed this image to my Docker repository. So let's look at the backend deployment. This is a typical YAML file. I'll not get into the internals of this. Just look at the labels. Kubernetes works on selectors. So you can say that this is identified using app and backend with these keywords. And I'm saying I need just one pod running for this particular application. And I'm going to say I'm going to use this image hosted in my Docker repository Regithnus, which is that application I just showed you. And the version is 1, which is a tag, and the container port is 88. So let's bring this up. So typically, I'll just say kubectl apply file backend deployment.yaml. Right. So you say that the deployment is created. You can quickly see what's the status of this deployment. So it says it's available, it's ready. Now first thing that I want to see is have the pods come up for this deployment, because the deployment is just a wrapper around my pods. So you can say kubectl get pods. And you'll see that there's one pod, like I asked it to, coming up, and it's ready and it's running. So we are ready to go. Now, we can't really use this because we don't have a service through which we can reach these pods. So let's create a service. So I'll just show you how So this is a service. It's very simple. It's a kind service, and you see this service has to talk to which pods, right? So like we had given this label over there. Now we are saying select all pods which match this label app backend. And there are different types of service. Now I'm exposing it as a load balancer. On my local machine in Minikube, it will not resolve to anything. On a cloud provider, if you use an EKS or GKE, this typically you will see a load balancer coming up when you run this, right? So let's run this. So it's a simple command. You always use the apply. No matter what, you just say kubectl apply -f with the file, and you say backend service.yaml. And it has created a service. Let's see what's the status of this service. You say get service. You'll see that your backend service has come up, and you will see the external IP is pending. That's because it's running locally. And I have to do one more step to expose this on Minikube. You'll see the type is of load balancer. Cluster IP is an IP address which is within the cluster. It can't be accessed from outside. And it's running on port 80, but there's a port assigned to it. Right? Now let's try to access this. So in Minikube, you can expose it through tunneling. So we're going to say I want to access this service, backend service, and we'll start tunneling that. So it started. Now this is where I can reach this service now. Let's run it on the browser. So you can see that backend is up with version 1, right? Now, say let's quickly change this. So let me go back here and say I want to deploy a new service without changing anything, right? So typically what I would do is I go to my backend service. Say I go to server.js, the developer would have changed something. I'll say, okay, now my new software, I'm changing something. Let's call it version 2. And you want to build it, Dockerize it, push it. This generally your pipeline does this. I'll say version 3. Just take it a minute for this to finish. All right, so let's push this to my repository, which is the Docker repository. So now my container image is now being pushed with my change. Typically, this can be done with your pipeline now. Yeah, so we are ready. The container image is ready. Now what we do is we go back here. We say the backend deployment. Now I'm going to say I don't want to use. So this is where the immutable part comes. I'm not getting into the container. Are you able to hear me? I hope.
Yes, very well.
Okay. So I'm going to say I want to use the tag 3, right? Version 3. So let's change this, and I do the same thing. I do apply backend deployment with the new change. And Kubernetes says it is configured. Now, if you say kubectl get pods, you will see that, this way your old one is still running while the new one is coming up, but your old pod is still running. It's not destroyed it yet. So now you will see that the new one is running while your old one is terminating. It's completely destroying it. So this is exactly what I mean by immutable. You're not even touching that container. You're just telling Kubernetes to deploy the new software, and it just destroys the old one and brings up the new. Now, if you see, still terminating. So if we refresh here, you'll see that we've got version 2. So as simple as deploying new software without getting into the server, and with higher precision in your YAML files, you can make it. You can add readiness probes to make sure that there is absolutely no downtime when the new one comes up. And if you want to scale, let's say you want to add more pods to understand this, to handle the load. Let's say I want say four replicas, right? So I just apply it again. Now, if you see my get pods, you'll see 3 more pods are coming up. It takes some time for it to come up. They're all running now, and your load balancer is actually routing the traffic to all these pods now. I hope that gives you a very quick demo of this thing. I'm sure this does not make justice to the entire how to get things done, but you can take it as a quick summary of how to get started. Let me go back to my slide. I think I'm pretty much done. Share my slide.
So we can open up for questions.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, we can go for some question. I think we have some time.
Yes, so there were already 2 in the queue. So one is, how well is Kubernetes integrated on Azure and GCP?
Yeah, so like I think in my previous slide, if you see Google Cloud, they have GKE. One of the best because Google are the main contributors to Kubernetes. you can kind of say it's native to them. Azure has AKS, so AWS has EKS. How is it integrated? You typically bringing up a cluster, the control plane is completely taken care by a cloud provider. It takes very less effort to bring up a cluster and add worker nodes. You don't really have to do the setting up of the master nodes or setting up the networking. Pretty much when you connect a load balancer for service, your cloud provider has already taken care of connecting all the APIs together. And also, in fact, if you in EKS, you can use your IAM to get the access to your cluster. So a lot of integration makes it very easy for you to get started and get going really quick. I would say very well integrated. If you want to start, just get onto any of this, and I would say makes life very easy for you.
Cool. And one more question on typical use cases of using Kubernetes versus other container services.
I don't have much experience using other container services. I've used Docker Swarm before. Very difficult, I would say. The way they define, they have defined how your abstraction between services, deployment. It's been difficult for me. I did not have a good experience with using Docker Swarm. I think not many people use it nowadays. I think it's highly deprecated now. There's OpenShift, other technologies. I think they're very good. I don't have much experience with them, but that's something that I would want to explore also. Kubernetes is something that I got started and been following up for right from the beginning.
Yeah, I think that last statement answers the next one. What are the other container orchestration products available other than Kubernetes? What about Red Hat OpenShift?
Yeah,
that's what you just answered. Yeah.
It's similar, I would say. I don't have experience using OpenShift, but I think it's highly one of the best out there. I would love to be in a session where somebody explains about OpenShift, definitely.
And there is one more which says VM scale set. Act like LB, most helpful for service, fabric, and AKS.
I didn't understand what's the question again?
VM scale set.
Scale set.
Acts like scale set.
Scale set. Okay.
Scale set. Yeah. Acts like LB, most helpful for services.
I'm not sure. I think I'm not used to scale set. I don't understand, but I think something to do with how VM scale, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Yes.
Yeah, I think I have experience using AWS. The way load balancers can scale VMs. Typically, it does the same job, but the time taken to scale to add new VMs typically is more compared to how Kubernetes does it with your pods. Think of it that is heavy, bringing up a new VMs and scaling. Comparatively heavy when you're talking in terms of containers. These are lightweight and you can do it really quick. And many of them compared to the less number of VMs. I hope I answered the question. Maybe I'm off track. I'm not sure.
And difference between deployments versus replica sets.
I've not used much of the replica set. Replica set. Typically, earlier there was something called replication controllers, which was replaced by replica sets. It's purely, I believe, replica sets are more to do with how many replicas of your pods to be used, while deployments are much more than that. Deployments supersedes it. I would say it also manages your replicas. At the same time, it does much more than that.
Yeah. So just to add a bit on that, so pod is a single instance And when you want to control multiple pods, you either need a replication controller or a replica set. Replica set is the more recent version of a replication controller.
Correct.
And you control these replica sets using deployment. So with deployment, you can control a pod through a replica set, the number of pods. And deployment also does a little bit extra in terms of you can change, like how we showed in the demo, you can change the versions of your containers and that rolling deployment and all that you can do with deployment. So it's a deployment is at a higher control level than a replica set.
Yeah, I think you summarized it really well, Aditya. Thank you. Any other questions?
Cool. I think that's the end of these questions.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I think it's been, I hope there's many takeaways from this, and hope to see you
Yes.
soon in Kubernetes.
Yeah. Rajat, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this informative session. So just before we leave, just a fun fact. So containers, you might have seen that that image of container being a container on a ship, right? So that's the container, which is your actual work. And then Kubernetes is derived from a Greek term, which basically means somebody who is steering the ship, a helmsman. That's why if you look at the Kubernetes logo, it looks like a steering wheel of a ship. And then Rajat spoke about Helm as, so now when you have too many pods, it's very difficult to control. So you really need a controlling apparatus. So a Helm on a ship is a controlling apparatus, and Helm helps in packaging of all these things. So they've kind of tied all these terminologies towards the same seafaring stuff. Okay, so thanks Rajat, and thanks everybody for your listening, and also it has been interactive. You have dropped in quite a few of questions. So I think with that we also reach the end of the time.